Well, we in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 today. Y'all can turn your Bibles there. 7. I did it. That was Tyler's idea, throw a curve at you. We are in chapter 7 today. And after you see what the sermon's going to be, you'll know why I wanted to skip to chapter 8. So we'll get there one day. But I just want to read you the text I'm going to preach today and see what happens. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. And you can cover your ears if you want to. No, don't cover your ears. It's serious. It's serious, but it makes... y'all know, never mind. 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 7. Now for the matters you wrote about. It is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish that all men were as I am, but each man has his own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Well, we come to this chapter now, which is not about the problems in the church at Corinth. Corinth has a lot of problems. This is not one of them, or at least it's not one that Paul knew about, so he has to address them as a problem. But it deals with some specific questions about getting married or not. This whole chapter is about whether I should get married or not. That's really what it is. And I'm tempted because I want to piggyback and use this as a segue to some kind of seminar or some kind of conference about marriage. I don't think I'm competent or qualified to do that, at least not from this text. We're not going to be able to do that from chapter 7. It's not a conference about marriage. It's not how to have a good marriage. It's not how to be a good wife or a good husband. There are some principles that we will be able to glean from this text, from this chapter, which may help us with our marriages. But I can't go into today a sermon about how husbands ought to love their wives and be gentle with them. And I can't go into a sermon today about how wives ought to submit to and respect their husbands. I can't go into a sermon today about how husbands and wives ought to raise their children and how they ought to spend money and how they ought to make decisions and how they ought to deal with in-laws and all kinds of things like that, which every marriage has to deal with. Just practical things. And I think those would be good sermons or good topics for some kind of discussion because all of us have to deal with it, right? We all need stuff like that. I do. I used to. No, I do. Maybe someday we'll get to something like that. And plus, I have a good wife. I have a good marriage. I'm proud of it. I'm going to boast about it and brag about it. I know what's wrong with it. But I'm not an expert on how to do any of this stuff. So what I'm preaching to you is I'm preaching because what the Bible says, not because I know what I'm talking about. I got some good ideas, but I don't know if I know what I'm talking about. So I just want to talk about what Paul wrote. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. He says, now for the matters you wrote about. All right, what's that mean? Well, these people, as worldly as they are, as carnal as they are, the Corinthian church, they did have some legitimate, heartfelt questions about things that they were wondering about from a Christian, apostolic, biblical worldview. They want to know, what does God say? What does God think we should do? What should we do about this or that? And namely, things about marriage. And more specifically, things about singleness and celibacy. That's where we're going here too. And which one of those two options is a more spiritual option? Are you a more godly person if you're single and celibate, or are you a more godly person if you're married and got 10 kids? Those kinds of questions come up. I don't know what this letter was, but they wrote Paul a letter with all these kinds of questions, and now he's responding to that letter. And add to that some confusion, perhaps. I don't know if it was going on in Corinth, but Paul mentions to Timothy, Timothy is in Ephesus, this is many years later, but there's bad teaching out there. There's false teachers giving all kind of mixed signals to Christians about marriage, mixed signals to Christians about sexual relationships, those kinds of things. Like 1 Timothy 4, verse 3 says, talking about bad false teachers, they forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. There are people out there teaching that you shouldn't get married. Now, if you're a sincere Christian believer, no matter what else is wrong with you, you want to know, is it okay if I get married? Let's write Paul. Paul knows the answer. So they did. And so Paul deals with it right here. And it begins this way. It is good for a man not to marry. Now, that's not a translation. That's an interpretation. It's a good interpretation, actually. Just not a good translation. Literally, the text says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. That's what the words of the Greek text say. And then immediately you go, well, what does he mean? Not physically touch a woman, you can't shake her hand. It's not good to shake her hand, not good to give her a hug, not good to help her off the bus, or not good to do something that might require you to have physical contact with a woman. Well, I don't think he means that. He can't mean that. You're always having to touch people. Always having to touch people in some context, women included, men having to touch women. But what he means here is not to touch a woman sexually. And even there, take it to further, not to touch a woman sexually, even in the context of marriage. So he means a man shouldn't get married. It's good for a man not to marry. Now, he does not mean that it's morally good for a man not to marry. Because there are people who teach that as if sex is bad and it's morally good not to marry, as opposed to morally evil to get married. There are people who do teach that. There are groups out there who have twisted this verse to mean things like that, and they come up with all kinds of societies and groups and categories for which people who think that way to live, like they make up monasteries and convents where you don't ever get married. You don't ever have sex with anybody. Some groups even would say, even in the context of marriage, there are some Christian groups out there that would say, even if you're married, the only time you can come together to have sexual relations is when you're purposefully trying to procreate and have kids. And after you get pregnant, it's over until the next time. There are groups that say that. It's just celibacy is superior, marriage is evil compared to celibacy. That's what they're teaching. That's what they're saying. And so the only real spiritual people are the celibate ones. The only celibate people are the only ones who can really be genuinely spiritual and godly. There are people who think that. And so Paul's dealing with that here. I think this is the context in which he's working at. But he does not mean that. It's not that. In fact, if he did mean that, that would contrast or contradict what the Bible actually says. And it would also contradict all other practical sensibilities that any of us have. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Genesis chapter 2, in the garden, verse 18, the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a suitable helper." Now, God didn't mean it's not good for man to be alone, so I've got to give him a cool roommate. He doesn't mean I had to give him a conversation buddy. Adam didn't need a best friend. In fact, God put Adam to sleep, took his rib, and made a woman, and they were naked. Y'all know what that means, right? He made him a naked female, It's not good for a man to be alone. He made him a naked female. He wakes up and there she is. And he says, whoa, man. So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think that's about? Did God make Adam a roommate? Did God make Adam a boon companion? No. He made him a sexual partner. And they didn't have anything like clothes to get in the way. And when Paul says he means that it's good for a man not to marry, he doesn't mean morally good. He means good in an expedient way, good in a profitable way, good in an advantage. It's an advantage for you not to be married. And he tells us why later in this chapter, and we'll get there someday, hopefully a couple of weeks or so. Chapter 7, verse 26, he says, because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for you to remain as you are. If you're single, just stay single. Present crisis. Verse 28, those who marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. Verse 32, I would like for you to be free from concern. He's talking about marriage. It's a concerning thing. It's a troublesome thing. It's a crisis. I would like for you to be free from those things. That's what he means here. It's good for a man not to marry because it spares him those kinds of things. And that's all I'm going to say about that now. But what he means, it's good not to marry or have sexual relations with a woman or a man, and it can't mean anything else but that in this case, only in an expedient way. And here's why it's practically weird. It blows our minds with our sensibilities because, and I said this before a couple of weeks now in a row, this is the third time in a row, God created us sexual beings. We're sexual creatures. That's what we like. That's what we want. We need it. We have this desire and passion to have sex. It's powerful. It's dominant. It's a craving. We can't deal with it. And it doesn't make sense that somehow God would create you that way and then make it morally superior for you to abstain. That's just not practically wise. It's a very intense creation purpose that God made us for, and then make you that way and then say, nah, it's good, it's morally good for you if you don't marry. It just doesn't make any sense. The only qualification is it has to be with someone you're married to. That's the qualification. Someone that you're married to. Otherwise, you will be committing immorality. If you're having sexual relations outside of a marriage, covenant marriage relationship bond, you're committing immorality. Some kind of immorality, something. And that's the thing we've got to stop doing, right? Isn't that what Paul talked about the last chapter 6? Flee from sexual immorality. Well, now he's giving us this qualification. It's good for you not to marry, but because, he says, there's so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Now, I don't want to put on blindfolds, and I don't want any of us to be naive. I'm not going to get graphic. I'm not going to get gross. I'm going to try to be as sweet, PG as I could possibly be. But listen, sex is out there. It's out there, and it's in here. I think about it, you think about it, everybody thinks about it, and it's out there. There are men and women who also think about it out there. And they'll let you have sex with them. Some are more provocative than others. Some are more flirty than others. Some are more easy than others. Pretty much, most of us, pretty much, if you try really hard, you can find it. Opportunities for sexual immorality are plenty. And sooner or later, your sexual drive is going to come alive and put you in places where that desire will be fulfilled. You'll find some way to fulfill your sexual desires out there. But I'm going to tell you, that's not God's purpose for your sex drive. That's not God's purpose for why He made them naked. He didn't do that so they could go commit adultery and fornication and all the other sexual perversion things there are out there. That's not God's purpose for your life. That's not God's purpose for your sex life. what is God's purpose for your sex life? Y'all are quiet. What is it? Here it is, that you get married. That you get married, attract a mate, marry him or her, and let that be how you engage and release and fulfill your sex drive. That's it. That's what this verse is saying. That's what it means. That's it. Attract a mate, marry that man or woman, and fulfill your sex drive. That's it. Now, I'm not interested in the 50 ways and 50 shades and all that stupid, I don't want to say stupid stuff, but I want to say stuff that we don't need to talk about. Anything like that. You want to have sex? Get married and have sex. That's what this means. That's what this means. Because there's so much immorality out there, each man ought to have a wife and each woman ought to have a husband. That way you can have sex and not commit immorality. Get married. That's God's purpose for your sex life. Get married. It's not about having a boon companion. It's not about having a best friend. It's not about having a soulmate. It's not about having a compatible life partner. And all that stuff is great. If you need some help, maybe we can help counsel you figure out who that person is for your life. If you're not married, we got to find you that soulmate, that suitable companion. And you will want that stuff to be a big part of your search. But honestly, as far as sex goes, men and women, it's pretty much the same for every single one of us. We all got the same parts. They work the same, every one of us. The other categories you can work on, you got to find someone who thinks the way you think, all that, you have fun being around, all that kind of stuff. But men and women are women and men are men. You get married and you start having fun with each other. That's it. That's why you get married. That's why the sermon's titled, Why I Get Married? So you can have sex. That's why you get married. Isn't that crazy? Now, I will say a couple of qualifiers. I don't mean you just because you're in love and you're really passionate that you marry the wrong person. Don't do that. We have other deal breakers we have to work out. There are other issues that we have to work out to make sure that we marry the right person. Don't just get married to anybody just because now I can have sex and not be sinning. You got to have the right person. You got to marry the right person. But sex is a big one. In fact, sex is the big one. That's the big issue here. Now, once you cross over that barrier and you finally get married and you can start having fun together and enjoying each other like that, your sex life is now satisfied, but it changes too. It starts to get really difficult, I think difficult, because it's not just that you got married, now you have a sex drive that you can satisfy every once in a while. You go, okay, yeah, that's it. That's a major deal. That really is a major deal. And that's what I think Paul's talking about here. But it goes way deeper than that. He says in verse 3, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. And you go, well, this is a great Bible verse. Might be all the men's favorite Bible verse in the whole Bible. All you men who are married, all you men who are husbands, all you men who have a wife, there are two words here. And all you wives, this is for you too, but the first word is fulfill, or the first word he should fulfill. And that word means to give it up. That means to give. You have an obligation by debt that you should do to your wife. Give it up. Well, that's what the real meaning of the word is. Now, in our modern day times, when you say give it up, we know what you mean. But that's what the word means. Fulfill. Give it up. The second word is this word that's translated what did they translate it there? Marital duty. That's why I couldn't find them on the wrong page. See what this stuff does? The second word, marital duty, is the word that means debt. Payback, pay. It's the same word translated. Everywhere else in the Bible, it's translated the word debt or obligation. I'll give you one, Matthew 6:12. Forgive us our debts. That's the word. As we have also forgiven our debtors. That's the noun version of the word. So you have to give it up, the debt that you owe. The payment that you have to pay to be married. You have to give it up. You owe her, husbands, you owe your wife to have sex with her. That's your duty. Doesn't that sound strange? You just tell me where to sign. It's a moral obligation. And I'm like, you don't have to give me a Bible verse for that. Do I need a Bible verse for that? You just tell me what to do. I'll be jumping on that one. So the husbands are all loving this stuff. The wives are going, what? No, I'm being serious. I'm trying to be lighthearted with something that's driving me nuts. But wife, you have an obligation. The same thing applies to you. You are indebted to your husband to let him have sex with you. It's not an option. It's not an option. You can't cross over in your mind. No, I don't know how women think is the way men do. I know men could care less. You just tell me where to sign. I'm serious. Pretty much all the men, y'all agree with me? Nod your head. Y'all know it's right. Women might think something different. And I know historically, culturally, the jokes that go, women think things are dirty, and we've crossed over into some disgusting realm whenever you say you have to do your duty. You get married and you fulfill your duty. And that was the counsel that moms gave their daughters the day they got married for years and years. That's your duty. And you go, oh, yeah, right. Like now I got to go stand a post when the enemy's coming at me or something. But it's not an option. And even if you did think it was your duty and you didn't think it was something pleasant, you still haven't got a choice. You have no options. You have to give it up. I'm looking at the women now, okay? All right, y'all. Okay. You have to give it up. Now, the minute I say that, I live in a culture that's been influenced by a feminist. Even if we're hardcore anti-feminists, that ideology, that philosophy has affected all of us here, and we think that just makes us think weird. Plus, we're Americans. We're rugged individualists. Nobody tells me what to do. And the minute you hear that, even something as good as sex, and even if God is the one that gave you the command, you go, no way. Nobody tells me what to do. You don't tell me that's my duty, that I have to do that. You're offended with disgust that someone would even say, you have to do your duty. Husbands, you have to give it up because it's a moral obligation for you. Wives, you have to give it up because it's a moral obligation for you, for your husbands. In a minute, no, I don't think any of us will think that way, but I know our culture immediately repulses from those kinds of statements in Scripture. Don't they? It's weird, too, because our culture is perverted on one hand. They say, you don't tell me what to do, I'll have sex with anybody I want to, as much as I want to. And on the other hand, they become prudes, cold prudes. And they make up, recently, they make up dumb things like sex strikes. And you go, wow, fine. That's what they do. But the principle Paul's teaching here is not difficult to understand. It's not like we're having to teach some heavy doctrine where we've got to find out things that are over our head to understand. This is easy to understand. This is very simple. He says in verse 4, the wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to the wife. Again, this is another interpretive issue. The actual literal translation, this is from the Legacy Standard Bible, the new latest, greatest translation. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Neither the husband nor the wife have exclusive autonomous control to rule their own bodies sexually. Neither the husband nor the wife has autonomous authority over their own body to do what they want to do sexually. The spouse does. The husband has the control over the wife's body. The wife has control over the husband's body. Mutual ownership and control of each other's body for the purpose of sex. Not for lifting weights, not for carrying heavy stuff, not for doing all these other stuff that your body either can or can't do, but just for sex. That's what this is about. Nobody can say, you cannot say, my body, my choice. That phrase is absolutely out of the question in a marriage relationship. What you say is, my body, do whatever you want to with it sexually, whenever you want to with it sexually. That's what the text is saying. My body, it's yours, baby. Anytime. Whatever you want. That's what you say. I mean, like, it's not just an attitude either, it's a reality. You really don't get to say to your husband or wife, I don't want to have sex with you. What you say to your husband or wife, if you want to have sex, here's my body for you. Y'all with me? Am I? We'd be better off if we were just talking the gospel. Or Dan Moynihan said, one day you'll get to preach an easy sermon about predestination. Okay, I can't wait for that. If you want to have sex, baby, here I am. That's what you say. That's what this means. That's what this means. That's what the marriage relationship is. Your husband or your wife tells you what you can and can't do with your body in a sexual way. Now, I'm going to say this too, because I need to qualify that one more time. A lot of people will take a verse like that way out of context or way out of misapply it and they'll start abusing your wife, abusing your husband with some kind of extreme, kinky, sadomasochist, unusual things. And say, this is what I like to do. Get on the floor. Do what I told you. You can't. It doesn't mean that either. Unless it's something that you both enjoy, which that's 50 ways I don't want to hear it. La, 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 la. Don't tell me about it, really. But I would also say this, if that's something that both of you enjoy, you probably did not acquire that taste naturally. You saw it or learned it some other context, which probably was in an ungodly way. I do think that. And you might have discovered it somehow on your own, talking through things, learning some things, figuring out how to have fun with each other. I get it. I'm not fussing about that. I'm just saying you both got to be into it if that's what you're going to do. And you can't use this verse as being controlling and dominating and authoritative in a bully kind of a way over your wife or your husband. Just because you control their body and not you control your own body, that doesn't mean you get to be a bully. And especially with sex, you can't be a bully. But people make this mean even beyond sex. A lot of men use this to claim dominance over their wives in an unrighteous way. And if the verse don't mean that, and if you think it does, then you need a sermon on how to love your wife, not just have sex with her. If you don't love your wife, this is all going bad anyway. Paul gives one exception, verse 5. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, and so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Do not deprive. It's a Greek, it's a command, it's an imperative. It's present tense 2 minutes. Do not do not deprive, stop depriving. I don't know if that's what the Corinthians were doing, but present tense means don't deprive and don't continue to deprive. Just always be doing it. Don't deprive each other. And technically the word deprive means to rob or to steal or to fraud. If you fraud someone, you stole from them. If you withhold sex from your partner, from your spouse, the sense of it is that you robbed them. You frauded them. You defrauded them. Don't withhold sex from your spouse. That's what Paul's saying here. If you don't repay the debt that you owe, you committed fraud. Now, if they're in the mood, if your husband or your wife is in the mood, then do it. What he means. Don't deprive yourselves. Don't deprive each other. That's the marital responsibility that you have with them. Now, I want to chase a couple of rabbits real quick. It puzzles me. It puzzles me as a man, as a husband. Been married 34 years. I've seen it. I know it. I know you've seen it. I know you know it. No one ever talks about it. But it puzzles me why anyone would withhold sex from each other and miss out on this gloriously blissful experience. Why would anybody hold out and miss that? Like, do you know how much fun that is? And you withheld it? Does that not make any sense? Doesn't make any sense to me. Does it make any sense to you? Why would people do that? No, I'm going to say this too. I get it. I get it. This happens to every single one of us here. Genuinely, there are some days you're just not in the mood. It's more than just a biological impulse. There are days when your wife or your husband has done something that really made you like, I don't even want to look at her anymore. No, that's very rare for the men. I've said this, like if your wife made you mad, she could come in there and come on to you and you're like, oh, I forgive you, baby, come on. But I get it, you're just not in the mood sometimes. It hadn't made you too happy. You have other circumstances add to that, like you're stressed out about stuff. One is you're not in the mood, and your boss fussed at you, and everything else is going wrong today. The car broke, everything went wrong, and you're stressed out. And now you want to do it? Really? Come on. I get it. I'm saying I get it. Or you might not feel good. Have a stomach ache, headache, a real headache. Just if you don't feel good, you don't feel good, right? I get it. I'm not fussing about that. I understand. Two, you have all kind of variety of other issues that come into the place. Important distractions like kids. You have kids in the house, and like you're feeling fresh and you're in the mood, and all of a sudden here comes the kids. You can't do anything with kids running around. They were taking a nap, and now it's over. It's over. Forget it. Or company knocks on the door, or you're just busy. You have a schedule problem. I got so many things going on. It's like, I know you're wanting it. I know you're in the mood. I want to give it up, but it's my duty, and I'm ready for it, but we just didn't get to. So because we didn't get to, we deprived each other. Tired. Plus, it's a technical thing too. It gets complicated. There's processes that you got to go to get from point A to point B, and sometimes that's just, I don't want to deal with that. Or you don't want to deal with that. They write country songs about that. Another reason people deprive each other is because of revenge. Using sex as a weapon to get even or to get what you want because your husband is not being very loving to you. My husband wasn't loving me the way he's supposed to love me. He's supposed to love me like Christ loved the church, and since he didn't love me like Christ loved the church, I'm not giving it up. That happens. Or my wife wasn't respecting me, she disrespected me one too many times in the past week, and I'm done. Or it might not be revenge. I'm just going to say it. I get it. Look, I'm just not as good looking as I used to be. Sometimes that affects things. That affects the way you think about sex. It does. Works both ways too. That's the stuff they write rock songs about. And two, it's an emotional thing too. If you're engaging, if you and your husband or wife are in the mood and you're ready into it, and all of a sudden it just doesn't feel like you're enjoying it. I mean, it's physical pleasure, but your mind's somewhere. It's like, well, that wasn't even worth it anymore. And after a while, because it wasn't worth it, it killed the emotion of it. Even if it was physically pleasurable, the emotion of it was gone, and now you're just not in the mood anymore. So next time, it becomes a burden. I get it. But when Paul says stop depriving each other, or when Paul says do not deprive each other, those kinds of issues, that means there cannot be too many episodes in your married life like that. They happen. I know they happen. I get it. I'm saying it happens to all of us, but there can't be too many episodes like that in your marriage. Stop. Stop depriving each other. Don't deprive each other. Do not. Not many episodes at all. Except if you agree with each other to abstain for a little while, an indefinite time, a little while, a little small time where you both agree we're going to abstain from it, and not enjoy each other for a little bit, just so we can commit ourselves to occupy our time to prayer. Like a sex fast. So you pray. That's the only exception you have. That's the only exception. The only one Paul lists. And that could mean all kinds of things, but I would even include maybe not just necessarily just prayer, but some kind of devotion to a ministerial task that you're working on. And you're busy doing ministry. And because you're busy doing ministry, you just abstain for a little while. But then he says in verse 5, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. You got to get it back together again soon, not too long apart. If you don't get back together again soon and give it up again soon, things are going to happen. The passions that are at play in the body that God created you with, the sexual drive that you have, along with, you already have that drive. I mean, that's going on no matter what's happening. That's going on in your life when you haven't seen anything to trigger it. That's going on in your life when you haven't thought about anything. You wake up in the morning and go, wow, guess what I want to do? Hadn't had the first thought about anything else in the world yet. The attractions that the world has shown me has not done anything yet. But add the attractions of the world to it, along with all the philosophical and spiritual schemes and temptations that Satan tries to throw at you to make you feel neglected, or to make you feel like you deserve something, or to make you think that you have a right for this. The satanic and the demonic world, they're out to destroy you through sexual sin, and they're going to come at you with a fury. And if you don't come back together again soon, sooner or later, someone is going to find themselves struggling a lot harder to maintain sexual purity. And I cringe. I cringe every time I hear about someone falling. I cringe because those things happen to you, and you're like, no. It's a cringe-worthy thing that you might slip up and go on a date with a coworker or a neighbor or some other opposite-sex friend who you're just buddies with. And one thing leads to another, and next thing you know, you're falling. You've fallen into sexual sin because you didn't come back together again with your wife on regular short-lived intervals. You won't be able to control it. That's what Paul says, but because of your lack of self-control. Because of your lack of self-control, restraining your body appetite for sex. And it's hard, even with godly Christian people, it is hard to not indulge in sexual sin if you aren't doing it at home. Now you might say, well, you shouldn't be. No, you shouldn't be. But I'm telling you, if you're not doing it at home with your spouse, with your wife, with your husband, temptation is going to come on you hard. You won't be able to take it. And somebody's going to fall. Many husbands, I heard this from an old lady. I stole this quote from an old lady. She said it during when the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky thing happened. She said, many have slipped between the knee and the hip. Many husbands and wives have fallen because they were being sexually deprived for too long at home. Now that's in the Bible. I'm not trying to give you some psychological gobbledygook. That's the Bible. That's what verse 5. Come together. Come together again. Come together so that Satan won't tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now that doesn't give husbands or wives an excuse to cheat on each other. You still don't have that permission. But you cannot have a good marriage without a good bit of sex in it. I believe that. I've done enough counseling before. I believe 70% of all the marriage problems are because of sex or lack of it. Because if you're not having sex, well then the kids do something stupid. Well, that just compounds it. And then you have money problems, and then you have in-law problems, and you have all these problems, and you're not having sex. What's happening to your marriage? That's why you got married, right? You got married for that. You shouldn't be having problems with it. That should help you with all the other problems. Hey, the kids are really being hellions today. Okay, baby, I get it. Come with me. And Paul says in verse 6, I say this as a concession, not as a command. Now this goes back to what he said in verse 1 about not touching a woman, not being married, staying single, being celibate. What he means here is, in his opinion, it's better if a man doesn't get married at all. That's his opinion. It's better if a man just stays celibate and doesn't have to worry about stuff like this. It's better if a man stays celibate, but it is okay if you get married. That's what the word concession means. It's something that you allow, something that you give permission to. And this is the only place this word's used in the whole New Testament. It means Paul saying at his discretion and his kindness, you have a point to make, but you don't really have a power to retain the point. My point is that you should just not get married, but I'm not going to make that a command. You should just stay single, but I'm not going to say that. It does not have to be what you think it has to be. This is not a decree of authority from the Apostle Paul that everybody should stay single. That's not a command. It's not a command to be celibate. You are allowed to get married. But let me say again, the only way you're legitimately allowed to have sex is if you are married to the right person, which takes discernment. We got to figure out who that is. Maybe all of us here can help counsel you to find that right person. Maybe we know somebody for you. We'll help you find them. But if you're married, it's not a command that you have to stay single. But if you do get married, then you need to be having regular sexual time. Regular. I say every day. I really don't say every day. I just like to say that. And if you are married, you cannot be celibate. And Paul says in verse 7, I wish that all men were as I am. He was single. Now, some scholars have proposed that Paul might have been married before. I don't know that I agree with them. He was a Pharisee, and the cultural appropriations of Pharisees, most of them were probably married, and some suggest that he might have been on the Sanhedrin, and if you're on the Sanhedrin, it was required that you be married. So they would say, well, Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin, and he was a Pharisee, so that made him have to be married. I don't think that's necessarily a rule. That's speculation. But there is no biblical statement saying he was married. So I'm not going to go there. But he was single, he was satisfied, and he was happy about it. Now, I'm sure Paul was as nice a man to women as he was to anybody else. I'm sure he loved the women. Not loved them like in a sexual way, but he had all these women friends. He loved them. But he didn't need one, and he didn't want one for a wife. He was content without a wife. And he desired, that the word wish means he desired that all the other guys and gals in the church were the same way. Not as a command, but as a wish. And you go, but hey, that's crazy, right? Is that crazy? Hey, I wish all of you were single. I wish all the men in the church who were single were just single all the time. Just like I am, Paul said. I'm happy without having a wife. But then he says in verse 7, each man has his own gift from God. And one has this gift, another has that. And then he just says, this is in the sovereign will and plan of God to give the gift of singleness to whoever he wants to give it to. This is a gift. Celibacy is a gift. Because God didn't create all of us celibate. God created us sexual beings with desires and passions and needs and wants. And there's some days you can't think about anything else. People who have the gift of celibacy hardly ever think about that. People who have the gift of singleness, it doesn't bother them. Rarely ever, if it ever does bother them, very rare. It's the word charisma. It means a gift of grace. By the grace of God, he made somebody not burdened by sexual desires. That's pretty much all of us here have sexual desire, except for the people who have the gift of celibacy. A special ability, a special gift. They can live without it. Doesn't bother them too much. I think Jesus is talking about the same thing in Matthew chapter 19. He's talking about marital unfaithfulness and divorce. And he says in verse 10 through 12, he's talking about that. And the disciples said, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it's better not to marry. And Jesus replied, well, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For some are eunuchs because they were born that way. Others were made that way by men. Others have renounced marriage because of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. That's the same thing. It's the gift of singleness. It's the gift of celibacy. Only the people who have that gift can accept that and just live with it. Paul's saying, I wish everyone were like me and celibate and single. But that's not everybody's gift. Somebody has a gift to do it. Somebody doesn't. It's good to be single. But it doesn't mean that you're more godly or more spiritual if you're single versus if you're married. I think that's the nature of the question that the Corinthians asked Paul. But if you have the gift of celibacy, then enjoy it. If God's made it so that it doesn't bother you, if God has made it so that you're not stressed out about it, then enjoy that. You really ought to enjoy that, because the opposite or the alternative is to wake up in the morning and go, oh, Lordy mercy, what's going on? What's going to happen to me today? And if you don't have the gift of celibacy, then get married to the right person and enjoy having sex with that person only. And I think that's my last sermon I get to preach on sex. So, let's pray. Father, we are grateful for your word. We love you that you have been merciful to us and kind to us to give it to us. And Lord, even though our discussion of the text today feels very awkward and goofy, Lord, I know it's serious. Lord, I want you to work grace in all of our marriages so that that's something that we do. We fulfill our marital duty to our spouses. We enjoy it with each other. And Lord, if there's those of us who are single who want to get married, I pray, Father, for your mercy to them, that you would provide for them a husband or a wife, that they may enjoy this gift that you gave us. Father, I pray, help our church be encouraging and counsel to each other. Lord, I just pray, just make us godly. Make us a godly church with godly families, godly single people, godly married people. So Jesus will be glorified in us. I ask it in his name. Amen.